You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Hey, did you know that the fish you're catching in your favorite lake in Mississippi may not have been born there? And if not, where were they born? We may have a clue for you today with Brooks Warren here on the show.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Today, we're going to learn about fish hatcheries with Brooks Warren, who you're an expert because you're at Turcotte Fish Hatchery right here in Mississippi, right?
Well, I guess you can call me an expert. I know what I know, I reckon.
Yeah, we're going to call you an expert.
Okay.
Now, and then how long have you been at Turcotte?
Just 8 years as of the other day.
Okay, 8 years there. So in regards to a fish hatchery here in Mississippi, one of those, that is a state fish hatchery. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you get asked this, and it's probably not easy to summarize, but when somebody says, what do y'all do over there? Yeah. Like, how do you answer that?
So we have field biologists all throughout the state, and they do samples and all kinds of studies on these public lakes that we have. And they'll come to us first of the year, and we get a stocking request. It goes all throughout the state, and we're tasked with raising those fish and stocking those fish out, whether that be a state lake or like a river lake, an oxbow lake, or one of our reservoirs. We stock pretty much any public body of water. Okay.
And so the people that are managing those bodies of water say to you, here's what we need.
Yeah. And they do that by doing shocking samples as well as talking to anglers and seeing what they're catching. And from there, they can figure out, what we need. And that's when they come to us.
Okay. And so for you, Brooks, and your team there at Turcotte, what fish are there? What do you have?
So at Turcotte, we mainly deal with the Florida largemouth bass, copper-nosed bluegill, red-ear sunfish. We do grass carp occasionally, shad for forage occasionally. We do hybrid striped bass and stripers in the spring.
Okay.
And then just kind of odd and end stuff from there. But I'd say the most production is out of our bluegill, red ear, and bass.
Okay. Yeah. From a freshwater standpoint, it kind of sounds like a little bit of everything.
That's
basically.
right. That's right.
And the process of, I guess, growing those individual species, they obviously have to be separated.
That's right.
What's that process kind of like throughout the year?
So we have 17 production ponds.
17, okay.
So we can kind of separate fish out and grow them out, and we'll do that with every species because obviously you don't want a predator and a bass, in your bluegill pond. Yeah. You lose production that way. So everything's spread out, and then we raise them out to whatever stocking size that is requested, and that's when we harvest the pond and we'll stock them out.
How do you harvest them?
So each pond is outfitted with a concrete, we call it a kettle, and it is at the lowest point of the pond, and it's got a screen that falls into it where obviously the water can come out, but the fish can't. So we pull that pond all the way down to the kettle, and from there we'll get a guy in the kettle who's netting fish, sending them up the wall, and they're moved to the truck, and from a truck they're moved into our hatchery building, which we can take them off the truck and put them in these raceways, and then we can get a sample on them and a number on them, and then start divvying them out and sending them off where they need to go.
Okay. Let's just use an example like largemouth, the Florida strain largemouth. Mm-hmm. When y'all are pulling those to deliver them somewhere, what size are they?
So a lot of the request is for 2 to 3 inch fish. And that usually takes, we say, about 45 days from the hatching to the stocking process. They grow pretty quick, but that's usually done, in April into June. Really, is when we do that.
Do the species kind of follow the same spawning time and cycle and everything they do in the wild?
Yeah. Well, our largemouth, they're Florida fish, so anytime like it gets warm outside, they want to go to spawning. So we'll pull them inside, which we just started doing this in the past 3 or 4 years. We've got a big round recirculating tank that we can chill down to whatever water temperature we want to keep them at. And those fish will think it's winter until we get ready to spawn them, which is usually around Easter. We'll start warming that water up, and then we'll put them out into our ponds and spawn them from there.
Have you ever had an instance where, I don't know, like something happens where one, maybe you have a levee that gets weak or breaks and one drains into another and having to deal with those
we haven't had the levee breaking, but we do have some problems with birds and stuff.
Okay.
Birds will actually transport fish. And we've pulled a pond before and we've got crappie out of it, which we don't have a crappie anywhere on the facility. I'm sure it came from Ross Barnett or really anywhere, just a bird, pulled it from, but it does happen.
I've wondered about that. Yeah. Okay. You're confirming something that I've always wondered, and I've heard, I never studied, is the idea that, let's just say we flood something and let water sit, and they'll say, well, eventually fish will be in there. And you wonder how. Yeah. It's birds.
It's birds. A lot of times it is birds. Yep.
But how are the birds transferring them?
So a lot of them they're either getting eggs, on them, or they're, I don't know if they're regurgitating fish out of their stomachs. It could be several different ways. Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating, though, to think that those natural processes just sort of take over.
Right. They do, for sure.
Yeah. For you there, is this kind of what you wanted to do?
It really is. I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do growing up. I played sports growing up. When I got out of high school, I still wanted to be kind of competitive. I'm a competitive guy. So I joined a basketball club back home and I kind of just fell in love with it and then just kind of took off from there. I didn't really have a major starting out in college and fell into the aquaculture program and this is where I am now.
Yeah. One thing leads to another.
That's right.
As far as getting over into the world of working at MDWFP or under that umbrella, how'd that happen for you?
So I really just a guy that my mom actually knew his wife, worked with his wife. He ended up being my boss. He kind of offered me a contract job, and I worked 6 months on contract, and then they hired me full time that following year.
How about that? And the rest is history, as they say.
That's it.
It's interesting. You mentioned that competitive streak, playing sports. Yeah, I went through that as a young person of, okay, football is not an option anymore, nothing. But there's some competitiveness over in the fishing side, especially in the tournament fishing. So it was tournament fishing for you.
Yeah. Me and my dad, he bought a boat when I was, I don't know, midway through high school or whatever. And from there, we just kind of started fishing together. We still fish together today. So we do it once a month at least. And it's a good way for me and him to get some quality time together.
Being at the hatchery and all the work that goes into that with the different species, has it helped you as a fisherman?
It does. You get to see really what fish do that you didn't know a lot of things about. It definitely does help.
Yeah. Are people able to go to the hatchery and just show up and look, or do they need to?
Yeah. So Bob Tyler's more of the come and look around, but we do an occasional tour of the hatchery. We have some classes and stuff come out from these community colleges. And it's a pretty good deal.
And I'm skipping around here. I want to go back. You mentioned the process of pulling the fish out when it's time. How are they delivered? You're going to stock Florida strain, or you're going to stock bluegill in a lake somewhere.
Sure.
How do they go from Turcotte to where they're going?
Yeah, so we have 2 fish trucks, and one of them has 4 tanks on it, and the other one has 6 tanks on it, and we can get numbers and put them in each tank, and then assign each tank to each lake.
And then they are delivered same day?
Yeah, they're all delivered the same day. All the trucks are outfitted with oxygen, and we can run them pretty much all over the state.
Yeah. And you mentioned bluegill as what, in terms of stocking, you do that the most?
We get our greatest production out of bluegill. So we get our higher number out of bluegill.
Okay.
And we do that in the fall. So we let them, they kind of spawn on their own. As most people know, a lot of people like fishing on a full moon. As long as that water temperature is over, 65 or 70 in the spring, they're going to spawn, a lot of times once a month.
Yeah. And
that'll go all the way through the fall. And then we harvest them late October, November, and stock them out.
Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned people who, are sort of keeping track of numbers and what the reports are. So that helps them to know what they need in a certain body of water. And you mentioned electro, I guess, fishing where they are shocked and you kind of count them that way and then release them.
That's right.
You've been involved in some of that too?
I've helped out. I have. Like I say, they do that every fall. They do electrofishing surveys, and based on what they see and links, they get links and weights on pretty much every fish, and based on what they see, they can tell what they need. And
what about a place like Ross Barnett Spillway? Like, what do you run into there if you are
So there's all kinds of stuff down at the Spillway. That's where we go to collect our stripers in the spring, and you're no telling what you're going to knock up down there. We've seen 60-pound flatheads, and we've seen 10-pound bass. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff down there. There's some huge bass on the Spillway.
10-pound largemouth bass.
Yes.
Is that like are we putting a secret out there, Chip? We're going to have a run on bass fishermen below the Spillway?
There's a few people that fish out there for sure for them.
Yeah.
No.
And how many pound flatheads? And
I've seen 55 and 60-pound fish down there.
Really?
Yeah.
I've been out to the hatchery before, and it's not just pushing a button and the fish go in somewhere. Like it looks like a lot of physical labor. I mean, like you are out there like in the mud and everything.
That's right.
Like, can you kind of talk about that process?
Yeah, so it is a pretty dirty job, and it's not just there's often times where there's a whole waller out in the middle of the pond. You got to go out there and pick those fish up. But we always are taking helpers if anybody wants to come help. It's a pretty dirty job.
yeah. I was mentioning to you earlier, years and years ago. Of course, it's a federal hatchery. You were telling me that, but the one there in Tupelo, in my hometown, they were dealing with the alligator gar. And that being a big fish, they were actually using a net.
That's right.
To sort of go from one corner of that pond and walking it across to corner those big fish.
Yep.
I was wondering, like, do y'all ever have situations where you're dealing with larger fish, so stripers, anything at Turcotte?
Yeah, we do have some larger fish when we deal with stripers. Where there's actually a chemical we can give them that kind of relaxes them, and it makes them a lot easier to handle. But you gotta be careful with it because too much can obviously hurt them. So that does help for sure.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about people listening, the average angler might be thinking, okay, well, what does this all mean to me? But you help me out. I would think what it is wherever I'm fishing as an angler, certainly state owned, and bodies of water.
Right.
If I'm participating in the numbers and the surveys, that helps that body of water because then they're going to give you a more accurate number of what's needed. Correct?
That's right. That's very correct. Like I say, our stocking request varies every year. We'll have some that are off a couple years and then back on, but the anglers are definitely helping get fish back in their lakes.
Yeah, I'd heard I've referenced this a couple of times, but I heard somebody say once, they just used this phrase, you can't manage what you don't measure. So, I mean, that's certainly applicable in your field and what you're doing in terms of all those different species. It has to be measured so that you can manage it.
That's correct. Yep. And a lot of these like state lakes, we do a lot of stuff with those on these renovations. Where it's a 2 or 3 year process restocking all those, and it's usually some pretty good fishing when they open back up.
Now you mentioned crappie being one that you don't raise at Turcotte.
We do not. Bob Tyler does raise crappie. They raise white and black crappie at Bob Tyler.
Why one and not the other?
So they kind of largemouth bass and crappie, they kind of overlap. So you really need to split them up. That way you can raise your production. If you're trying to do multiple things, you're not going to have as good of a production.
Yeah. Do you ever run into people around the state, whether it's speaking in front of a group or just talking to people that general public didn't actually realize either that we had hatcheries or what's going on at the hatcheries? Yeah, there's
a lot of people that don't understand or don't know that we do have hatcheries. I know we're way back in the middle of nowhere, so a lot of people don't know about us. But we do have hatcheries. It's just we do not stock private bodies of water. We're solely for public bodies of water.
I mean, does every state in America have hatcheries that are feeding into their state lakes?
I know a lot of the Southeast does. Now, I'm not going to speak for, up north or out west. There's different types of hatcheries. We're a warm water hatchery. You have cold water hatcheries too that do a lot of trout and stuff. But as far as the Southeast, pretty much every state's got hatcheries, and we all really work together there's some hatcheries that, do better at this species and others that do better in this. And oftentimes we're, trading fish out and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Would you say that, the benefit, you look at what the hatchery, like what is going on at Turcotte, how it's, it provides fish that are being stocked in the lakes.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously something that directly affects recreation.
Sure.
For the average angler. Those of us are buying fishing license and getting to. So there's a benefit recreationally. Is there a benefit from a research standpoint too that comes out of the work that's done?
It can be, yeah. And I know Mississippi State has sent some graduate students, through our program as well, researching certain things. I know the Magnolia crappie was a big thing a few years back. There's been some studies trying to do some out of season spawning on possibly spawning crappie, in colder months. But there is some research for sure going on as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a really neat thing, obviously, that we have it. And, again, just the details that you've given us here in the show. I know we mentioned this earlier, but I think it's eye-opening for some people to go, well, wait a minute, I didn't actually realize that was going on. I just bought my license, I go fishing. I just thought the fish were there. I had no idea that if it's, let's just say in Tippah County Lake or somewhere here, that those fish could have been stocked from the hatchery.
Sure. I know a lot of the state lakes, they tend to go bass crowded, just because there's not a lot of bass harvest. So we do a lot of bluegill stocking in those state lakes, and really encourage people to take more small bass out of it to help that. So,
yeah.
There's a lake that they stock rainbow trout, right?
Yeah, it's a pond actually off of Lake Lamar Bruce in Tupelo. And that's strictly recreational, but it gets a lot of people out, and it buys, licenses. And
now, where do they come from? And I guess, how does that?
So I think,
because we're obviously not growing the rainbow trout.
Right. Bob Tyler Travels, I think they get them out of Arkansas, and they go get them the same day and stock them that same day.
And that obviously falls under that recreational deal too. It's just another advantage for the outdoorsman. Last year, right after I learned about that, Larry Pugh told me about it.
Yeah.
I had no idea, and I live close to that lake.
Okay.
And a guy that I go to church with is in my Sunday school class. About a week later, I told him about it, and he was giving me this look. And I knew later, okay, he was thinking, because about a week later, he sent me pictures. He and his little boy Christian were holding a big rainbow trout. Yeah. Well, it was big to him, you know. And I mean, I guess that's just a once a year or one time a year thing, because it has to be cold for them.
Right. They don't speak through the summer, so they really restock every year if they choose to do so.
Yeah.
And like I say, it brings a bunch of people out to fish.
Now speaking of fishing, how do you get to work at a fish hatchery and still fish bass tournaments? How do you manage that?
Well, I try to go fishing on the weekend. I guess I just can't get away from them enough. So, I enjoy it. I fish when I can, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Brooks, really appreciate you being here on the show, giving us a little information on what the hatcheries do, and just thanks for coming by.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate y'all having me.
Yep. He is Brooks Warren at Turcotte Fish Hatchery here on the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you outdoors.